Chapter 11, Part 2, starts at the top of page 269. Those next 3 years were hard years. I was cold sometimes. I was hungry other times. I was tired most of the time. But I could not say I was really unhappy, only uncomfortable. All about me, I had Father's dream taking visible form. First in the pictures and the articles he had taped to the walls, then in the models and diagrams he began to hang up, and finally in the skeleton of the flying machine itself, which he began to construct with light wooden poles. And on 3 Sundays out of the month, there were trips to the Whitlaws. At first, I had felt sorry for Miss Whitlaw, but I should have realized there was nothing that could faze that lady. She had her stained glass window carefully wrapped in cloth and brown paper inside a box that Father had built for her. And she always had her stereopticon and slides and some of her books. Some Sundays, though, they would come to visit us and help fly Father's huge model gliders. They were as thrilled at Father's progress as we were, and when we began to actually build the aeroplane, they made a point of coming down with an already fixed cold supper and helping us. But though they called it the airplane, or sometimes the flying machine, Father and I always thought of it as DRAGONWINGS. It took 3 years to build DRAGONWINGS because we never seemed to have much money to go around. We were still sending money home to Mother, and because we had tried to learn by trial and error how to build the frame and stretch the canvas over it. But by the end of the summer of the demon year 1909, we were ready. Father once tried to explain to me just how the airplane was supposed to work, but I never did follow much of it, though I do remember the shape. The airplane had no solid body. It was only an empty frame about 20 feet long, 4 feet high in front and angling up and back to only about a foot. The canvas-covered wings, which were 40 feet long and 6.5 feet wide, were on top of the frame's center. 6-foot-long struts separated the top wing from the bottom one. There was no cockpit, as there is in modern flying machines. The pilot lay flat on his stomach on the bottom wing. To his right, also on the wing, was an engine which powered the 2 propellers by a gear and sprocket system like the one on a bicycle. The propellers faced the rear, pushing the airplane forward rather than pulling it. In front of the flying machine was a pair of smaller wings, about 4 feet long and about a foot apart, which the Wrights called horizontal rudders. Future aeronauts would call these little wings elevators because they forced the airplane up and down in the air. The little wings could be tilted upward or downward. When they were aimed upward, they sent the wind at an angle around and through the rest of the airplane so the machine would go up. When the front edges were aimed toward the ground, the machine was directed downward. Father handled these with a control held in his right hand. In the rear of the frame was another set of wings, also about 4 feet long and a foot apart. But these rose vertically rather than horizontally. The vertical rudders allowed the airplane to make a level turn to the left or to the right. But an airplane could also turn in another way once it is in the air, and that way is also called banking. As the Wrights wrote Father, banking had always been a problem for earlier aeronauts who had tried to do that simply by shifting their weight around inside the airplane. The Wrights had solved the problem by controlling the shape of the wings. Orville told Father to think of a box from which both ends had been cut and which Father was holding in his hands, his left hand holding the top forward corner and rear lower corner of one end, and his right hand holding the top rear corner and the forward lower corner. If Father moved his left hand downward and moved his right hand upward, the top and bottom of the box would twist or warp. The front left edges of the top and bottom of the box would curl downward, while the front right edges of the top and bottom would curve upward. If this happened to the 2 wings of the airplane, the 2 sides of the airplane's wings would be presented at different angles to the wind. As a result, the left sides of the wings would rise and the right sides would dip, flying faster than the right side so that the airplane would bank to the right. That is, the airplane would seem to pivot on the right sides of its wings and turn to the right. The wings could be warped in the opposite way, of course, so that the airplane would bank to the left. Father built controls for the vertical rudders and the warping mechanisms of the wing following the designs of the Wrights. Since there was neither seat nor seat belts, Father had to hold onto the flying machine with his left hand. And the only way Father could control both the rear rudders and the curving of the wings was with a kind of hip cradle. By moving his hips left or right inside the wooden cradle, he could make the machine turn either left or right, but of course, he could not make a level turn to the left or right that was separate from banking to the left or the right, as you can in a modern flying machine. Father's own improvement on the Wrights' original design was to put 4 wheels on the bottom of the frame center. If the flying machine and the control system sound funny, you have to keep in mind that these machines were among the first ever built. It was hard to believe when you saw a picture of the Wrights' flying machine that it really could fly. It was mostly a skeleton of wooden poles with canvas stretched only over the wings. It seemed like a rather flimsy thing to trust your life to, as it was not much better than a big kite. Our motor was only about 12 horsepower, which we thought was very powerful, for in 1903 the Wrights had hunted both in this land and in the other Demon's Land over the seas for a lightweight engine producing some 12 horsepower, and they had been unable to find one. They had to build their own. Fortunately, engines of the kind we needed were now available, but they were expensive. We had to dip heavily into our savings. And of course, the propellers had to be carved exactly according to the Wrights' tables. That was a headache, believe me. Somehow we did it. Neither the cost nor the troubles we met building Dragonwings could stop us. Finally, there came the day near the end of August when Father announced that we were ready. It was a good thing we finished it when we did, because we were just about broke. We tried to pay our rent, food, expenses, and money for Mother out of our earnings, but little by little we had to dip into our savings until we had only enough to pay the rent for next month and hire a team of horses and a wagon to haul Dragonwings up to the top of our hill and fly it. Even though Dragonwings did have wheels, we needed to carry it in a wagon because its wheels would have sunk into the ruts in the road and its wings, brushing the ground, might have gotten torn or even broken. If that test flight worked, we'd borrow money somehow and do it a second time, but for an audience of paying spectators. And with the money from that, we'd pay our rent for the next month and hire another team of horses and fly at some country fair near here and so on. To be honest, it didn't sound like much of a plan to me. Father was more of a mechanical artist than a businessman. He wanted so badly to fly that it never occurred to him that people might not pay to see him fly. Sometimes people want a thing so much that they lose their common sense. But if Father had been practical, he probably wouldn't have been trying to fly in the first place. I shut out all those worries, like what would happen if we tested Dragonwings and it did not fly, or how to drum up an audience of Dragonwings that did test out. It was around the end of that same August of 1909 that I began to get jumpy, like I was being watched, sometimes from the trees, sometimes from the vacant mansion. At first, I told myself it was just nerves. After all, I was getting positively ancient, for I was now 15 or 14 by demon reckoning. It was not so much my age that bothered me, it was the fact that after 6 years here in the land of Golden Mountain, I had even less chance of seeing Mother. I was proud of Father for wanting to be a dragon again, and even prouder of the fact that he was now so close to achieving his ambition to fly. I was just sorry that we had not been able to combine his more lofty goals with the more ordinary dream of seeing Mother. Of course, Father thought he could, but even so, his scheme had an awful lot of ifs in it. But Mother was patient, so I had to be too. And the feeling that there was someone or something else around kept on growing inside me. Sometimes at night, when I kept back at the barn, I would find a chair where I was sure it had not been, or books shelved. But with no real definitive proof, I held my peace. On the first Sunday in September, we had the Whitlaws down to help us christen Dragonwings. The night before, Father and I had spent all our time painting scales on the wings, and as an extra touch, Father had painted eyes on 2 squares of canvas and added them to the front rudders. They hung limp now, but during the night they would flap like flags. After they had admired our paint job, Miss Whitlaw produced a small bottle of wine. "For the christening," she said, "whatever it's to be named." "Dragonwings," Father said. "That's a funny name," Robin said. "Ah, well, it's a lucky name," Father shrugged. His dream was still something very special and very private, and not to be shared even with the Whitlaws. Robin wrapped both her hands around the neck of the bottle and tapped it lightly on the frame. None of us was very sure about how strong the frame really was. The bottle broke, and Robin ignored the wine stains on her dress to declare in a very solemn voice, "I christen you Dragonwings." But it was mid-September before we could even think of flying Dragonwings. The rains did not clear until the second week of September, near the time when we had to pay our rent. The deliveries were light on the 6th day of the week, and after I finished my chores at the store, I was let off early. But when I got home and opened the side door to the barn, I found Black Dog there, rummaging through our bedding. He sat down on a stool when he saw me. "How do you do, Moonshadow? What are you doing here? Can't one cousin visit another cousin? It's a lonely country. Maybe I missed the side of your monkey's face. He bent his elbow and scratched himself like a monkey for a moment. He had always tried to make jokes like that, but they were never very funny. I saw that time had not been very kind to him. Do you want some tea before you go? I asked. Black Dog smiled coldly. You have all of my father's charm and tact. Do you know that? What do you want? He waved a hand at an old, overstuffed chair we had found in the mansion and brought into the barn. Come, sit and talk with a lonely man. His voice grew hard when I remained standing. I said, sit. I'll stand if you don't mind. Black Dog shrugged. He leaned forward and clasped his hands together, resting his elbows on his knees. We never did get to finish that talk we began a long time ago. About what? About those two lovers to whose memory I have consecrated myself? You mean the demon dung. Black Dog laughed and regarded me in a cold, shrewd way. I want you to tell me about the thing you find yourself married to. Your life, that is. I want you to tell me why you don't think your life is ugly. He waved a hand around. You live by yourself with your father, whom you hardly see. You live in a place unfit even for animals. It is cold in the winter and an oven in the summer. Your clothes are patched. You are undernourished because all your money goes into this demon contraption that you're not even sure will work. And you don't think your life is ugly? What do clothes or food or a house mean? I shrugged. Suddenly I realized something. You're jealous, aren't you? You're jealous that we have something to believe in. Black Dog stopped scratching his leg and slipped his hand into his boot. He pulled out a knife. I'd like you to find the beauty in my cutting off your nose and ears. He got up slowly. He was smiling to himself. Yes, I'd like you to try to tell people how beautiful you are with only a stub of a tongue. I grabbed the nearest thing to hand. It was one of Father's books. I drew it at Black Dog, but he ducked. He came toward me slowly, the knife gleaming in his hand. I turned and darted out the door. Black Dog was right behind me. I could hear his boots pounding the ground. I ran through the tall flowers in the garden and made it into the orchard. I wanted to take a shortcut through the orchard to the road leading down the town, but then my foot caught in a root. I fell forward into the weeds and old leaves. I got up on my hands and knees and caught Black Dog's boot in my ribs. I toppled over onto my back. He drove a knee hard into my stomach. Or maybe I'll take a testicle or two. He let up on my stomach a bit so I could breathe. I suppose he wanted me to get enough air so I could beg, but I suddenly got sick of the whole cat and mouse game. Go on, I told him. Get it over with then. You won't be singing that tune the first time the knife breaks your precious skin. When I didn't say anything, Black Dog smiled. Well, you're a plucky lad, though you're a fool. I'll let you off easy if you tell me where you keep your money. No. He jabbed his knee into my stomach and pressed the knife point against my throat. Come on, come on. Tell me where the money is. You just said yourself that money wasn't important. DRAGONWINGS is. We heard a branch snap then. Black Dog did not look around. He kept the knife to my throat. I felt my throat muscles begin to tighten as if they were trying to crawl away from the point. Don't take another step, Black Dog warned. I can cut your son's throat before you can jump me. Don't harm him, Father said. I heard him walk around from behind us until he stood in front of Black Dog. How important is that demon contraption to you? Black Dog asked. It's very important. More important than your son's life. Don't tell him, Father, I said. No, Father said. I'll get the money for you. Father, don't. But I saw Father walk over to a nearby oak tree. An old, battered birdhouse swung from one of its branches. Father reached up. Even he had to stand on tiptoe to get it. He took it down and pulled off the rooftop. It was only tacked on lightly with very small nails. He took the money out, a thin roll of demon dollar bills, and tossed the birdhouse down. He put the bills into his big handkerchief and tied up the corners into a bundle. He then tossed it over to Black Dog. Black Dog snatched it up like a hungry dog after a bone. He stuffed it into his pockets. I should slit your son's throat anyway. And you know I'd never rest till I got even with you. Yes, I respect you at least that much. Black Dog got up and ran off into the trees. I started to get up to chase him, but felt suddenly dizzy. I must have banged my head when I fell, and my chest, where he had kicked me, felt suddenly tight. I fell forward. Moon Shadow, Father said. He bent over me. Go after him, I said. That bastard, that son of a bee. He's still our cousin, despite what Uncle did, Father said sternly. He helped me back into the stable and brewed some tea. Father brought a cup for me and the teapot and gave it to me. I drank it. Outside I could hear the rain. I'm sorry you had to tell him. Father patted my arm and managed to smile. It doesn't matter. I'm going to report this to the sheriff now. Do you think it might do any good? It might. Father grinned and shrugged. And it might not. It was getting near sunset now. I could see the red lights within the barn. Our rent money had been in that roll, as well as the money we had planned to use for renting a wagon and a team of horses. What we were going to do for money, I didn't know. Well, the sheriff never did catch Black Dog, and the next day, when the landlord came for his rent, he got mad at Father when Father asked him for an extension. He gave us 3 days to come up with the money, or he'd claim everything inside the place. But we didn't know anybody in the town we could borrow money from. They all thought of Father as the crazy Chinaman. We knew beforehand that Miss Whitlaw did not have any money she could lend out, for Robin's college money was sacred and untouchable, even if we were inclined to ask. And Father was too proud to go back to the company. We had to go, but how? Dragonwings was too big to be carried on our backs, and we had no money to hire a wagon. We tried all the next day, but no one would rent us one on credit, not the crazy Chinaman. Even my employer in the store refused, saying it was too much money. It looked like we were stuck. We would be able to take away only what we could carry, and we were going to lose our dragon wings. Father did not say anything when I put on my boots and hat and went down to the town through the rain to use the store's electric talker, or telephone as the demons called it. I wound the crank with a whirring sound, and when the operator came on, I gave her the number of the house where the Whitlaws worked. Why, hello, Moonshadow, Miss Whitlaw said. How are you? Fine. I'm afraid you won't be able to come down tomorrow. We're moving. Oh, found a better place? Yes, that's it. Well, let us give you a hand. No, I couldn't think of it. Nonsense, there's always work to be done. Expect us there right after church. No, please, you mustn't come, I said desperately. There was a pause at the other end of the line. Is there something wrong? She finally asked. No, everything just fine. Well then, why can't we come over? She demanded. We'll just be busy. So busy you don't need help? Miss Whitlaw asked suspiciously. Yes, that's it, I said, and hung up before she could ask me anything else. The rain had stopped by the time I got back. I could not make out where Father was in the barn where I first got back. Then I made out a shadowy figure sitting near Dragonwings. Father. He stirred in his corner. I heard a groping at the stove, and then he struck a match, and the light flared about his face as he bent over the kerosene lamp, intent on lighting it. He shook the match out and then trimmed the flame. Then, and only then, did he look up. He fumbled painfully for the right words. It's finished, he finally said. We still have a day to raise the money, I said grimly. You will not go back to Uncle, Father said. He ran his hand lightly along the lower wing. He stood up suddenly and got his padded jacket from the nail on the wall. He put it on silently and gestured to me to accompany him. Outside, the night was a cool, crisp autumn evening. The rain had just washed everything, seeming to sharpen the plant smells. The colors seemed brighter, and the beaded raindrops gleamed like jewels on the petals of the flowers and the leaves of the trees. It was clear for the moment, but I could see the fog beginning to move over San Francisco. I could not see how people could stand to live in the flatlands when they could live in the hills. There is something about the view from the hill that is exciting, a kind of godlike perspective in which men become only tiny creatures walking about their toy houses on a patch of land which seems to float on a vast ocean under an even bigger sky. Father started to trudge up the hill. I had to run to catch up with him. The road was muddy and our boots made wet, sucking noises. My jacket was not really thick enough to hold out the wind, and I pulled the collar tighter around my neck. It was a cold, sharp wind, but with a sea salt smell. Father glanced at me, but still he said nothing. The setting sun behind us cast long shadows, which raced up and up ahead of us along the road. And then, at the very top of the hill, we turned off, walking to the very edge of it and looking down on the barn below us. Father crossed his arms, slipping his hands into his armpits to keep them warm. So this is the way it ends, he said finally. We came so close, and yet we failed. The fog had completely covered San Francisco now and was rolling about over the bay towards Oakland. It was as if the world below us were slowly fading away like the dream it was, and only we existed now on a tiny island of reality here on this hilltop. Maybe this is the final test in this life, I suggested hopefully. Father thought for a bit and laughed. Yes, maybe it is. We can build another Dragonwings. You have your designs now, and we know all the tricks of actually building an airplane. Father grunted, and he smiled in his old way. Then he tilted back his head and began to sing. There is a little beauty in the opening of the flower. There is a little glory, though it only lasts an hour. There is a little sorrow in the final farewell kiss. There's only a little pain, though you'll never again see your miss. I have a little dream for the flying of a plane. I have a little scheme I'll follow yet again. There is a little heaven just around the hill. I haven't seen it for a long time, but I know it's waiting still. Then he clapped his hands on my shoulder. How about a cup of tea to warm our old bones? He asked. Poor black dog. There was some beauty to life after all, even if it was only the beauty of hope.